Welcome to another episode of Triple Take Cinema. I'm one of your hosts, Dustin. With me, as always, is Kyle and Alex. And this week we are tackling a theme that I picked that I'm going to call fake reality. So our three movies are Dark City, which I believe is from 1998, and then 1999's The 13th Floor, and The Matrix. I guess I'll start. I've seen all three of these, but it's been a long time since I've seen any of them. I was just telling Kyle before we hit record here that I believe the last time I saw The Matrix was probably over 10 years ago, which is wild. Alex, I also noted that we're recording this in very early November of 2024, and I guess later this week, The Matrix is showing at the Oriental Theater in Milwaukee on Wednesday and Thursday nights. So that's kind of fortuitous timing.
Don't forget The Matrix Reloaded and The Matrix Revolutions after that if you wanted to kick things off.
Oh, I didn't know they were doing the full original trilogy. Interesting.
It's Keanu-thon at the Oriental Theater, baby.
Oh, that's right. Okay, that makes sense. And then Dark City, I think I probably watched that in high school, so early 2000s, maybe college, mid to or late 20-aughts. And then The 13th Floor, I want to say I rented this from the public library when I was in high school before I had a car and before I had a job. Because I remember, I don't remember when it came out, but I remember being intrigued by the DVD cover, and for some reason it strikes me as one that I like rode my bike to the library to rent or whatever. And so I'm pretty sure I've only seen 13th Floor twice now, the second time being for this podcast. Dark City I've probably seen, I don't know, 2 or 3 times, including this viewing. And then The Matrix I probably watched like once a week after it came out on DVD and all the hype for the original sequels. But then I had kind of a dry spell. Kyle, how about you? What's your familiarity with these three movies?
Oh, familiarity. I'll start with The 13th Floor, which it's a movie that I knew existed. It's a movie that I have a lot of memories of, probably just from the previews of those green lights.
Oh yeah,
Like those green lights are so. It's bizarre. This is one that like I had not seen.
you mean
but
like the computer,
the computer green lights? The plane.
Yeah. Okay,
The plane that you're like, yeah, that
like
they decided they were like, well,
the screensaver,
exactly.
basically.
The thing where they were like, well, the machine truly works, and someone came in and was like, but wait, what if when they're in, we make it look dope? Yeah, I'd never seen it, but it's just one of those ones that I think I texted you guys when I was watching it. I was just like, I'm just shocked that I've never brought it home, but that's why we're doing the pod. Bring all those chickens home to roost. So I'm very pleased.
I will. I know I'm interrupting your intro piece here, but you mentioned like remembering the trailer. I asked my wife if she wanted to watch this with me, and she ultimately chose not to. But as part of trying to persuade her, I queued up a trailer for it, and holy fucking shit, is that like the most 1990s ass trailer. Like it felt like I was watching it, like the style of it was like, though you wouldn't pirate a car, like anti-piracy ad. It was just like
classic.
so, and it made me like not want to watch it. Not that it was
also
a great
ruins
movie.
like every twist. The trailer.
Well, yeah. Well, even the fucking box art kind of ruins a twist by having that, like the poster for it has that screensaver graphic, but they kind of cleverly pull it away from one of the major twists. Anyways, continue. So,
Yeah,
13th Floor you were familiar with but never watched, and then
never watched. Same with Dark City. Dark
Yep.
City was also one that, like, again, and I think it's just to speak to the preview point. I think because I'm, was born in the 80s and then did most of my movie watching in the 90s. I think that's a big part of the reason why I do not watch previews ever at all if I can avoid it.
Yeah.
I have this very weird policy that bothers a lot of people in my life, but I don't care. I'll tell you all about it. I start watching a preview, and as soon as a neuron in my brain fires and goes, "I'd like to watch this movie," I turn the preview off.
Hey, no, that's great.
Um,
That's a good
yeah,
policy right there.
Yeah,
Like at least you
seriously.
watch enough of it to get interested in it,
yeah.
right?
If it's 5 seconds and I'm like, I'm in, just turn it right off.
Yeah.
Because
Why waste?
yeah,
Yeah.
so many of those '90s previews just give away. And then The Matrix. Oh boy. Some would say I'm synonymous with The Matrix in my friend group, from which is still the same from high school and from before that. So when The Matrix came out, I went to the theater and I saw it, and it changed my life and my world and all those things. And then I was at a hockey game the next day, and I couldn't shut the fuck up about it, shockingly. And it was a midday hockey game, and the guy was like, "Do you want to go see it tonight?" And I was like, "Yeah, of course." And then the next day, I was somewhere else, couldn't shut the fuck up about it. Talking to someone else, and they're like, "Oh, do you want to go see it tonight?" And I was like, "Absolutely, I want to go see it tonight. Let's go see it tonight." And then the next day, the same thing happened. All different people. It went on for one more day. When this movie came out, I saw it 5 straight days in the theater with different people other than my father, who saw it 3 times. Not sure he loves it, but I don't care. So I was just like, literally, I was an apostle leading people to the fountain of youth. Like I couldn't stop talking about it, and I talked about it with enough zeal that people just had to come. It was bizarre. It was like I by the fourth day, I was kind of like, let's see if I can get someone to go see this shit tomorrow. This is great. But yeah, I saw it 5 times in the first 5 days it came out, and then I don't know how many times I've seen this movie. Hundreds. It's easily in the hundreds.
Yeah.
But even on, but it has also been a minute, probably like a year or two since
Oh,
I've
wow.
watched
Okay.
it, and so it was nice to check it out again with also like a I'm gonna watch this all like I'm not gonna put it on and because I'm so familiar with it, maybe walk away, maybe whatever, maybe
Yeah.
fall
Yeah.
asleep. I'm gonna like watch it, with intent. Another, magic of the pod. So yeah, that's my familiarity with all this, and yeah, Alex, what about you?
Yeah, all that resonates very deeply, as I will get to in a minute. But with Dark City, I had heard about this movie for quite a while. I knew its status as kind of a cult classic. I knew director Alex Proyas from the Will Smith I, Robot, which is kind of a mediocre movie with great world building and set design. Kind of a common theme for him as a filmmaker, I think, at least from those two. But had not seen it until prepping for this ep. And then 13th Floor was a total. I must have had amnesia because I had no conception of this movie's existence. Dustin, your text was the first time I'd even heard of its title. I think I confused it with 13 Ghosts in my head before Googling it.
Yeah.
But this was as blind as a blind watch gets for me with 13th Floor. And then The Matrix, I didn't see it in theaters like you, Kyle, because I was 10 when this came out, and that was, I could have seen it in theaters, but for whatever reason, I did not. Probably saw it on VHS, within the next year, and then saw it fanatically on that same VHS over the next 12 months after that, probably a dozen times. Vivid memories of standing in front of the lockers with my friends talking about how excited we were for Reloaded the week before that came out. And it's almost hard to talk about the impact this movie had on me because I kind of lump it together with other works like The Hobbit or Ocarina of I'm waving my nerd flag strong today, but the there are these works that you get exposed to when you're young that almost rewire your brain, and they kind of
Mm-hmm.
become a prism that you view other works of art through. And I feel like The Matrix was one of those for me, and it's been a delight in my 20s and 30s because I don't think I go a year or two without rewatching this, whether it's catching it on TV or I saw a theater screening of it last year without revisiting it. And it's been consistently delightful to look at it more critically as an adult and kind of see that everything that resonated with me as a kid is kind of backed up by just all this amazing fucking craftsmanship and writing and acting and special effects. Just firing on all cylinders. Can't wait to talk about it. Dustin, where do you want to kick us off today?
Yeah, I was kind of jockeying back and forth between, originally I think when I came up with this set of films, I was gonna like assign them in a watch order of like chronological for when they released, which would have been Dark City, 13th Floor, The Matrix, even though like they're very much sandwiched within roughly a year of each other. But since I didn't do that, I think I want to start with 13th Floor, then get into Dark City, and then get into The Matrix. Because I think that there's a lot in common between Dark City and 13th Floor. Um, but, or sorry, with Dark City and The Matrix. And obviously there's stuff in common with 13th Floor, but that's kind of the odd one out if you ask me about the three of them. So starting with 13th Floor, like I said, I had stumbled across this at the library or something. Like I don't remember seeing trailers for this. I don't remember hearing about this when this was like out in theaters or when it got released. It kind of bombed in theaters. I think what was most interesting to me reading up on this movie to like understand the background uh, behind it. Produced by Roland Emmerich, who did like
Saw that.
Independence Day and stuff like that. Like that jumped out at me. Like that was a big name. He's still pretty big name, but like especially in late '90s, huge name to have attached to a project like this. So like, I imagine that his name was thrown around a bunch and like the marketing for it. But I think the most interesting thing about this was to learn that it was loosely based on a book from the 60s, which was originally adapted into like a German miniseries in the 70s. Because I think the story here to me is kind of like interesting and somewhat compelling, even if the movie ultimately falls flat and kind of doesn't stick the landing when it comes to like ending in a interesting way. But spoiler alert, if you haven't seen the movie, hit pause or find the timestamp in the podcast to jump ahead because I'm just going to flat out spoil the fact that the movie is a two-layered reality, right? Like that's the big twist is you find out that the fake reality of the 1930s made in 1999 um, that's established pretty early on, but then the 1999 reality is a fake reality from spoiler 2004 2024, sorry, this year, which I thought was interesting. And I think that like,
I liked that. I liked that a little bit. I was like, oh, 2024, great.
yeah,
Yeah, I
that's
smiled
fun
at that.
to have that. I should have found out the date. Like you see the date on the paper at the end. We should have done this back in June, and so we could have actually watched that date. It's like when the
Synchronicity would have been nice.
like when the Back to the Future dates appeared and everything. Yeah, there was no like Jimmy Fallon or Jimmy Kimmel special for this movie like there was for Back to the Future back in like 2017. Yeah, I don't know. Like, I didn't watching this again for like the second time. Like, I think it's interesting, somewhat compelling. I like the scenes with like the 1930s. Like, I thought those set pieces were really well done. I thought one detail that jumped out at me that I thought was like really kind of interesting and kind of cool is like when you first go back into or you go into the machine with the characters and you see the 1930s and it's all like kind of loose, like light sepia, is it sepia, um
I want to
like
say sepia.
sepia tone, and you see like, so it's all kind of washed out a little bit and everything. And is that my house dishes in my house that I'm hearing? Might be. So you see that colorization, and at first I thought like, oh, it's just like how they're showing it being the 1930s, and like it's just like a theatrical style choice. But at some point in the movie, the main character references that the color grading is off in the virtual reality, but that none of the avatars seem to notice, so it's fine. And I thought that was like kind of a cool little detail, but that was probably the most unique thing that kind of stuck out with me on this movie. Like I feel like the lead, Craig Bierko, is a very generic seeming actor that wasn't that compelling. Vincent D'Onofrio,
Wooden is the word that came to mind most often for our protagonist.
yeah,
Very like, he was trying for acting maneuvers that he could not pull off, or that the script
Yeah.
called for that he could not pull off. Just kind of you know, a blank slate in a way that did not serve the story.
No, no. I think he was most interesting when he was in his 1930s character with his little mustache and everything, like just looking somewhat like disheveled generally. I did
I
love the
loved.
fact when he jacked in and was in the middle of a swing dancing competition and his partner was like, "We're gonna get disqualified," like
That was
screaming at
nice.
him.
He played that well. That was a good
Yeah,
moment.
yeah, and it was pretty great when he just walked away and just like chucked the number away and stuff. But otherwise, like it's almost like this movie. I mean, I think the fact that to me it didn't stick the landing was like the most disappointing part of it. Like everything, the murder mysteries like kind of compelling enough, and there's enough twists and turns there. Like I even forgot rewatching it. Like I thought that the old dude that got murdered at the beginning was murdered by Vincent D'Onofrio's Avatar from the 30s that came out. And that they definitely lead you down that path to think that's the case. And then you find out that it's the main guy's like future real human figure. And like, I just don't feel like they did enough depth to his character to explain his motivations for being crazy, and there's just a lot going on while also not a lot going on. Um, but I, in my internal lexicon of filmography, like this movie is forever lumped adjacent to The Matrix since it came out the same year and ultimately is like dealing with a similar theme, albeit executed in very different ways. And you know, like the story behind that false fake reality being built is obviously very different between the two movies. But I think it's interesting to watch in opposite of the Matrix, knowing how closely adjacent they came out and like how different routes they went in telling these stories of these fake realities. But yeah, I mean, I think that visually it's interesting, and oddly enough, the fact that like all the 1930 stuff looks somewhat dated in terms of the CG, actually, I feel like doesn't hurt it because it's supposed to be like fake. I feel like there was, you know, knowing that it was like a fake reality, like I was more forgiving of the not great special effects, though I'm sure at the time they were pretty good. So there's a lot of rambling. Who wants to jump in and share your thoughts on this mediocre film?
I'll jump in a little bit if you're good.
Yeah.
Well, I did just to speak to the woodenness of our main character and the acting. I really liked the turn, and by liked I mean thought was hilarious. The turn from a guy who answers every offer of a cigarette with like, "No, I don't smoke," as said as literally as if someone who's never had a cigarette in their life.
Mm,
I was convinced by this. I was like, oh, he's very atypical. He's never smoked. And then how quickly he started smoking
yeah.
and how voraciously he started smoking, I was like, okay, I guess, yeah, I'll go with this. But it was, to me, it was a very like, I don't know, to speak to all these little moments of like he had overcooked the goose on the
Did he
non-smoking
did he
to then turn
even
the dime.
did when he so because he didn't like 99 version of him didn't smoke. He
Yeah.
went back into 37 version who did smoke.
Mhm.
But when he was
Yes,
inhabiting 37's body, he never actually smoked. So like
correct.
and ostensibly like this was something in the like in the universe of the movie that I'm assuming is that when you are jacked in, so I'm jacked in into 1937, my 1937's consciousness is theoretically inhabiting my 1999 body, or is like in like parallel transit to my 1999 body, and then once that 1937 iteration is disconnected, then it shoots in and wakes up the 1999 body. So all of that is to say that there is no reason, because his at that point his 1937, well, his 1937 version consciousness never inhabited his 99 body. So there's no reason that he should have started smoking. It's not like he had like muscle memory or anything like
Nope.
that. for it
It's literally, yeah.
whatsoever.
They were just like, oh, he's stressed now. Let's show that on screen by having him smoke now. That was it. That was
And
like
be
all that
very
happened.
specific about like
Yeah.
literally like not just like idly lighting up, but like
But just,
constantly.
yes. The scene that kills me the most with this turn is when he's in jail and he is smoking and enjoying a cigarette like as like an 82-year-old Frenchman would do. Just like I have smoked so many cigarettes in my life. Like this is how you enjoy it pensively, thinking like just how it was amazing. I loved it. I thought that I couldn't get over that. How like quickly he went from I've never smoked to like I've done this for a million years. I like smoke better than air now. And so anyway, yeah, but to the movie. I actually it's funny that you were like to me anyway, it's funny that you were like spoiler alert on this movie for being like a double, triple, however many layers you want to go into this. Because and I was saying this to one of my friends where I was like, I'm really surprised you haven't because he's kind of like I'll say this, he's affected by simulation theory. And and so anything that starts with simulation theory, I just or anything related to to a simulated reality, I'm like, oh, the obvious move is to go as deep as possible and go more and more and more layers because once you open up that can of worms, for me, it kind of naturally goes there. So I was almost more like waiting for that to happen
Uh-huh.
Right.
with
It's still presented
like
ultimately as like the big twist at the end of the
oh
movie.
yes,
Yeah.
absolutely, yeah, absolutely. I guess I didn't feel that it didn't stick the landing like you did. I don't think any of it was like great. I also agree that it was, relatively mediocre. But the landing for me, the ending for me kind of it worked. It worked for me more along the lines of the movie without it feeling like it wasn't earned. Because I guess the turn that for me that I don't the thing about this movie that I found most interesting about the characters is what happens to a person's personality, consciousness, whatever you want to say, morals, moral compass, when they are engaging in this reality type of hopping, and how that can create depravity just because of you're in a world that you don't actually have to inhabit. And that to me kind of felt like, literally the line he says where she's like, why you changed? You became this person. Why are you doing these things? And he's like, oh, it's fun.
Yeah.
That to me
Right.
was kind of like enough for that character to be like, oh no, I've engaged in too much of this type of stuff, and I've lived in worlds that I have absolutely no stakes in, and I've killed people, and that was fun. So I'm just doing more of
Yeah,
that.
I mean, I think like that's interesting and compelling. I just wish they would have shown like that's a moment where like I feel like it would have been interesting to me to like see a flashback, like see flashbacks to him committing these crimes that he doesn't remember when he was inhabited by 2024 evil version of him or something. Like I just feel like we got the glimpse of like the ultimate serial killer more or less for literally
Mm-hmm.
like 3 minutes at the end of the movie, and
Right.
it was arguably like the most acting that Craig Bierko did in the entire movie. And so maybe he had just topped out like what he was capable of doing, so they didn't have him in that like role any longer. But that's what I kind of mean by it, like not sticking the landing, is that like that guy like that version of him finally gets unveiled and we only get a few minutes with it, and then he gets conveniently shot by the Allstate guy, and that's that. Like there's
Right.
just not they're not like, there's not a more compelling uh story beat that happens there that I feel like they could have easily delivered on.
Yeah, I totally agree with both of those perspectives. Kyle, I thought that that nugget of what happens to your morality when you're engaging in this reality hopping and getting to vicariously do things like in the case of Hannah and Fuller, sleep with young women and kind of live this like player lifestyle that's discordant with how you normally conduct yourself. But that was only told through expository dialogue, so I felt like that was so underdeveloped throughout the movie. It was like this big driving force, like, oh, like Hannah Fuller was plugging into the Matrix so he could sleep with these women, but we never really saw the ramifications of that. like a couple of them, like making kind of coyish comments to his 1930 37 version. And with David, who is the 2024 version, Craig Bierko, the antagonist, who reveals himself at the very, very end of that movie, it totally took me out of it how late in the narrative he shows up as an
Yep.
antagonist. And it's like, oh, we're supposed to find him like this big threat when there was nothing teased about his existence. They really delayed that reveal way too long structurally, that there was this third level of the simulation for it to have any impact, for him to be like a menacing figure, or for that interesting thread of I'm getting hooked on the vicarious thrill of murdering people, and it's changing my core personality to carry any weight. And then you add on the melodrama and kind of ham-fisted nature of that performance, where his eyes are bugging out and he's trying to be menacing, but it's really not coming across. And to me, that kind of is what you're alluding to, Dustin, when you say the ending falls flat or it doesn't come together, is,
Mhm.
that delayed reveal and just kind of the ham-fisted nature of the execution. And to your point, Kyle, that it teases this interesting thematic thread that never really gets explored to me at least, in a satisfying way. So yeah, I liked the 1937 segments of this movie. I also did appreciate that line about the sepia tone and the colorization, Dustin. I thought that was one of the clever little tricks this movie pulled. I also liked the visuals of when Vincent D'Onofrio's character Ashton, the 37 version, is kind of driving away from 1937 Los Angeles, and he's passing the oil machinery and he's driving through the barricades. I thought that was some nice visual storytelling to communicate like he is passing the thresholds of what they had built for this constructed reality.
Mm.
And I like that we don't see what he sees until we get the reveal of what Doug Hall sees when it's that, he sees the screensaver image of just the
Yeah.
uncomplete. And I kind of appreciated how goofy that looked. Like
Yeah.
it looked real janky and real like, 90s CGI, but it kind of works for the story that they're telling, where this is this iterative form of this simulation where, yeah, if it's an unfinished like kind of edge to this reality, it's gonna look janky and shitty. So there were there were visual elements that I latched onto, and I really like the reality kind of, hopping conceit that this movie is based on. I liked the visual flash when they have that kind of flutter in their iris and it,
Mm.
kind of turns into computer code. And yeah, there was enough that kept me afloat in following this core mystery of, what happened with Fuller's murder. How deep does this reality go? I will say that as someone who is not very plugged in to, simulation theory or really, knows a lot about it beyond pop culture, I was deceived by the two layers deep reveal. And to me, it felt a little bit like, oh, this kind of feels like, a Twilight Zone episode stretched out to 90 minutes when it should have been like, a compact little short story. And I don't think the narrative conceit that they built could support the weight of, a
Yeah.
1 hour, 45-minute movie.
This could have been really cool as part of like an anthology or something like that. Um,
Yeah, I mean, to your point as well, Alex. I feel like, yeah, they really they tried as hard as they could with regard to, bringing that antagonist in with, like you said, just dialogue from Gretchen Moll's character. Like she was supposed to be the one that was kind of cluing you into there's this other actor at play that she's not happy with or not pleased with or whatever that she has a connection to. So yeah, that it is definitely very thin on the end in that regard. I see what you guys are saying there, but yeah, yeah, yeah.
I also love the just like ideal, like however the 2024 idealistic future. Like we have round, shiny buildings on the water. That's the future. The last thing I think that we can shift after this that I want to call out is like I do really like this movie feels very like, especially compared to Dark City and The Matrix, like of the three, feels very 90s to me. Like
Yeah.
stylistically, and part of that is arguably because, right, like Dark City, which we'll get to in a second, is very what's the term? Anachronistic.
Anachronistic, yeah. It's
Anachronistic.
deliberately
Anachronistic. Yeah.
anachronistic. It's out of
Yeah,
time.
yeah, and then The Matrix is kind of timeless in a way, whereas this feels like, I thought, like when he was getting early on, he gets a voicemail at home and his fucking like throw that fucking thing out the window. Literally, it's just like, you have one new message. Beep, beep, beep. Like, just literally, like, that's what your voicemail thing sounds like when you have a message. That is infuriating. That felt
Oh
very
yeah.
90s. I loved the vibe of like when they plug in Jack into the 1937 simulation, they're laying on a table and there's like green laser light, like right on the surface of their face. And then when he wakes up in 2024 at the end, he just has like an original Xbox gaming headset on and he's just laying in bed with it or whatever. Like, I
It's
thought
the
that was
future, man.
like kind of like, I mean, felt very dated, but also like they did a good enough job showing that like, yeah, the simulation in a simulation isn't as advanced as like the real world simulation was and stuff. But yeah, like this one of these three movies feels very much like did not age well in terms of like the technology, like the way it's portrayed and things like that. Um,
Before we pivot, I
or
want to
yeah,
give a quick shout out to Vincent D'Onofrio, who I kind of
Yes.
see
Yes.
as like a Brad Dourif in terms of whether he's in Full Metal Jacket or schlock like, the Jurassic World movies, he's going to be fucking giving it his all and elevating material. And even though whoever did his hair and makeup in the 99 version was doing him no favors, I thought he crushed all of his roles as Ashton, the bartender, and really gave a nice air of kind of menace and cunning to those scenes that, could have otherwise fallen even more flat. And I thought he was a really interesting screen presence that elevated those 1937 segments to me. And I thought, him at the bar and him kind of in the bathhouse when he is choking Doug, were some of the stronger sequences in the movie because of his
oh for
performance.
sure, yeah. Though
Yeah. No. Yeah.
I do feel like I didn't follow like how he took Ashton's character when he came into 99 and like went into the computer room and was like, I lost like where he was going with that character because he suddenly became, I guess maybe he was just like totally like having an existential crisis and like realized he was, I guess suppose he was told he was like a fake and a fake kind of a thing. So maybe I'm over analyzing that piece of it, but I do
Yeah.
largely agree. I
Yeah.
think he was probably the highlight in terms of performances in this movie.
Yeah. I mean, I think you can give a lot of actors like, hey, you're gonna not know how a door works with a key card,
Yeah,
and a lot of people would not be able to actually do that in a way that feels real and interesting, and also kind of funny, but still like like serious. And yeah, just how
That's a great
his
example.
yeah, like how his characters that he played had to the things they were grappling with mentally. I loved his he was the best part of this movie, like easily. And so it was good to see him super young and doing things and knowing what we've gotten since then.
yeah. Well, let's jump into Dark City. Uh, I like I said, I think I'd seen this 2 or 3 times. I'm familiar with Alex Proyas' work, but not like The Crow is his big claim to fame, and I've never seen The Crow. Like it's honestly never really stylistically it never appealed to me, and I think that's what kept me away from Dark City so long. Is stylistically it didn't appeal to me. and I don't even remember what compelled me to watch it for the first time. I do remember reading, like, after the Matrix dropped, like reading a lot of comparisons, and people, drawing those comparison lines. And this Dark City came out in '98, and I think this movie, like, it's fucking weird, but I love it, and it's dark and, like, just unsettling in ways. But there's pieces to it that feel, I don't want to say sloppy. I noticed early on that it was like, it felt very jumpy, and then I was looking at the IMDb trivia for it, and apparently it has like one of the shortest average shot length of any film. Uh, and then I was like, well, that makes sense why like every scene lasts for like a second to a second and a half before it cuts to another like camera angle and stuff like that. So like there's a lot going on here in terms of like the world shifting and things like that and the different characters. But to me, this movie is, it's weird enough and unique enough and like different enough of whatever it's trying to tell that I feel like it's something I'm disappointed it took me so long to come back and rewatch it. And I don't want to ramble. I'd rather hear what you guys have to say before I like jump in with other thoughts.
Alex, go ahead.
Yeah, I dug this, like you, Dustin. I think the visuals are what I latched onto the most strongly. I would love to get some green bathroom tiles, like in that opening scene where it's just this like deep, like moody green. Like I fucking love how atmospheric every frame of this movie is. And there's a texture to it where it looks great in those kind of big citywide shots where I was reading that they used a lot of models and miniatures to, really construct this city. But it also looks really great close up when you've got the kind of film noir vibe that it's going for with a lot of the neon lights and like the dark alleyways and just the angled ways that the buildings are constructed. I was reading that Alex Proyas was inspired a lot by German expressionism when he was like making this movie, and it reminded me of Dustin. You and I saw The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari in theaters earlier this year, and just the sets in that movie where it's these kind of like geometrically impossible angles and like, you know, very narrow streets. Like I can see the influence that that had on this movie's visuals, and I really liked how that was incorporated. And yeah, the central mystery here was definitely stronger than in 13th Floor. I it kept me afloat. I'm very glad that we watched the director's cut instead of the theatrical,
Yeah.
because I actually went back and watched the opening to the theatrical cut right after finishing it just to see what was different, and was kind of stunned at like how much they lay out up front. And in a similar way that we did with 13th Floor, if you haven't seen this movie, you should stop here, skip ahead, because it does have a really nice reveal. But the twist here is that this city that our protagonist is kind of making his way through is an experiment being conducted by this group of aliens called the Strangers, where every night at midnight, or not even every night because it's eternal night, but every 12 hours or so, they everyone loses consciousness and they reconstruct the city and reimplant different memories in different people because they're trying to study human nature. Their species is dying and they're trying to get at the core of what it means to be human so they can save their species because they operate on like a collective memory versus individualistic subjective memory that we have. And that was another element of this movie I really liked, is I really liked the dichotomy between, subjective memory and experience and collective memory. And I like the way that it draws on the audience's collective memory of all of these different genres because it's pulling in film noir, it's pulling in German expressionism. So I like the way that the themes are acted out through the visuals. And the strangers, I just thought had a cool visual design where they're kind of Nosferatu looking dudes with the trench coats, and they have this ability called tuning where they can kind of reshape reality as they wish, which is an ability that
What's his
that
name?
Murdoch,
Rufus
yeah,
Sewell.
Murdoch.
Yeah.
Yeah.
that Murdoch
John
has,
Murdoch.
John Murdoch. Yeah, and I just really really enjoyed this. Kyle, what was your take on Dark City?
I watched it, and then I wasn't sure how I felt about it. And I just kind of let it stew for a bit. And I woke up this morning, and I really hated it. I think
Oh.
I really, yeah, I just for a couple reasons. I'll say the things I liked first. I did love the sets. I thought the sets
Mhm.
were great, and like they had a very tactile feel to them, like a very
That's a good word.
Yeah.
yeah, that
There's
was
if
that
there's
was
one thing this movie does right, it's like the atmosphere. It like
hmm
nails that. Just like feeling
yeah.
this eternal darkness kind of stuff.
Yeah, and I definitely and some of the and yeah, just some of the not only the bigger sets and like the pan outs to see the whole city and sort of the smaller pan outs to look above a street or whatever. But like you said, like those individual bathrooms, the pool room that Kiefer Sutherland hangs out in to like get some quietude, all that was very very good and very pleasing to the eye, and so I appreciated that, and also the end when they get to Shell Beach and all those things. Like also visually, I appreciated that. I For me, like the why we're watching what we're watching never felt. I never cared, and I don't think they worked hard enough. And I don't know how you could without it being like a big long show, maybe, or something like that, where you're going on multiple seasons and going very deep on individual characters. But like, I wasn't sure why I was supposed to care about these beings. I also wasn't sure why I was supposed to care about the plight of the humans in their experiment. And so I'm struggling to find, okay, I guess I feel bad for the humans because I'm a human, and so I don't want my reality to be corrupted in this way. However, now we've brought into this world extraterrestrial beings that are living in a way that we can't even really conceive of in a lot of, with the collective memory and the time that they're around and their ability to tune reality to fit their needs. So I'm kind of like, well, maybe then I don't care that the humans are being treated this way, because why wouldn't I? Maybe I should care more about this random race of strangers. And they also all look like powder to me. All I could think about was powder, the movie Powder. It's all I could think about. So like, I found it distracting, the way that they kind of looked, and the tuning. The tuning. I mean, I don't know. It was a little. I get why it all had to happen this way or whatever, but it was like weird that he could tune. I didn't find that
The-
satisfying as to why he could.
yeah, I mean, I took it as like, and I don't think they explained this very well, and I don't know that they had to or they needed to, but like, I took it as essentially he evolved to have the same level of power that they do. And because he was the first human to evolve to that point, he suddenly would give them whatever it was that they were searching for, which
Yes.
Kiefer Sutherland says is like a soul or yeah, like that's very kind of nebulous.
That's
I
that. Yeah.
will
Yeah,
That
I will point out really quick though that like there was something about the tuning that bothered me. There's a kind of a cool, like one of the first midnight like tuning sequences that we see in detail. Like it opens, or right beforehand you see like a couple, like a impoverished couple at their dining room table or kitchen table,
Why'd they
like
have to bring in the candles? Why'd they have to bring in the candles? They had to
yes,
bring in those candles
exactly,
physically. What are we doing
yeah,
here?
they literally
also,
put
it's such a laborious process. They're like physically bringing shit in. They're physically rearranging people in their chairs. They have to do
yeah.
this with like thousands of
Well,
people in
no,
this
but
city.
they literally bring in the candles, put them on the fucking table, but then the table stretches out to be this rich table, and all the shit appears on the table when it stretches out. And so I'm like,
Yes.
what is like? I can get, because then earlier they're talking like there's like a PA system and an assembly line of the others like doing like a PA system's like, oh, tonight we need 28 photo albums and 15 family photos, and it's like, wait, so I could get it if like these super hyper customized things they need to have physical versions of it, but like, are these candelabras that they have like personal attachments to, like that? And
Yeah.
then the other thing that fucking bothered me about that scene, and I rewatched it like 3 times just to make sure I wasn't going crazy, but before they tune, when they show the couple just in the impoverished version of them having their dialogue, it is such terrible ADR. Like the woman clearly was not, that was not her like speaking live on the set, and it just, the voice did not match the person, and that felt sloppy to me, and that bothered me.
I did appreciate that visual gag though. I that was one of the things that like stuck with me about this movie is the impoverished couple like getting their rags to riches story in a matter of
Yeah,
seconds. I thought that was a
yeah,
nice little visual moment.
yeah,
Yeah. So yeah, it just like it just didn't land for me in terms of like it never the motivations, not the motivations, but the hooks never got into me for and I think if the hooks don't get into you, then there's a lot going on that I'm like I don't know how much I really care, and there's a lot of people, there's a lot of beings being killed, and also like are we out in space? You know what I mean? Like we're not
yeah,
like in some little corner of the Earth where this is happening. So we've then removed these human beings in this experiment from Earth, and they're
Yeah,
floating in space.
that
And
was
there
definitely
was
the
just so
implication.
yeah,
yeah, there was so much of those types of moments, and I do think like it is tricky. And I mean, yeah, the theatrical cut starts with like here's everything you should care about and go 15 seconds of just that and anytime any movie and you know obviously there's more in the directors but like anytime any movie starts like that I think it's difficult for it to come to fruition in all that it's trying to accomplish so I just yeah there were some interesting I did like some of the conversations between Seawall and Rufus Sewell, John, and Jennifer Connelly's character, I thought were interesting. You know what I mean? About like, well, what if we're not these people at all? What if you don't love me? What about you know all that type of stuff? That's that sort of baseline questioning when your foundation of your reality has been taken away from you. That had some interesting, but that was also we're talking about like 2 3 minutes of the movie
yeah,
and so
Yeah.
there wasn't enough there for me. I didn't think the villains were like that interesting or you know. So there was just I was looking for something to grasp onto, and really what it was the sets and the you know I honestly think I wouldn't be surprised if there was some choice, some intentional choice either on the editing floor or on the director floor or both about how quickly those cuts are because that's
yeah.
kind of what where the world is right like it's trying to
Oh, for
you
sure,
know
for sure.
yeah
Right.
so there,
Fragmented memories, things happening
Yeah,
quickly.
yeah, that all seemed to track, and I did think that was pretty. Yeah, and then I also liked after I looked up what this director had done, just to kind of get more whatever. When there's a theater scene towards the end of the movie where they're outside on the theater on the marquee is a short film that he did
okay,
that I thought was yeah I was just like oh
yeah,
whatever I can't remember what it's called green something green room or green yeah I can't remember what it's called but I was like oh that's a short film you did like 10 years before you did Dark City and I would say The Crow just put a thing in there about The Crow because you've not seen that I haven't seen The Crow in maybe 20 years I'm not sure if I would like it as an adult it seems like a very
oh yeah,
specific angsty teenage movie of a time and place
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, they just came out with the remake this year that tanked too.
yeah
So,
yeah I don't think I'm seeing that
I do also need to see The Crow. And Kyle, one thing I wanted to, bring to both of you guys, but you gave me a good entry point, which is, you were looking for something to latch on to this movie, and I think that sometimes the critical response to movies can be more interesting than parts of the movies themselves. And I think it's really interesting here that Roger Ebert is like such a champion of Dark City, where he did six director commentaries in his life, DVD commentary, excuse me, and one of them was for Dark City. And in his kind of intro to his DVD commentary, he writes that I believe more than ever that Dark City is one of the great modern films. It preceded The Matrix by a year and on a smaller budget, with special effects that owe as much to imagination as to technology, and did what The Matrix wanted to do earlier and with more feeling. I think that's sidebar a totally batshit perspective to think that that Dark City is somehow more emotionally evocative than The Matrix, but he does say that the
I
point.
wouldn't disagree with that. I wouldn't disagree with the more emotion than the Matrix. Not by
Ooh,
much, but I
ooh.
feel like
We'll
the
get into it.
Matrix is maybe a little more, a little less about interpersonal relationships.
Sure, and that's Ebert's point, and he says the poignancy of Dark City emerges in its love stories, and he talks about the scene where John and Emma are talking, and Emma is saying, "I love you. You can't fake something like that." And I did think that was a nice moment, but it felt too thin for me, kind of like you were saying, Kyle, with those dialogue scenes taking up such comparatively small amounts of runtime given how much of this movie is dedicated to the pure world building and to the pure mystery and the mechanics of how this experiment is being conducted. I think that undercurrent is there, but for this movie to have the impact on me that it did, on Ebert, I would have wanted to see more of that romance and those interpersonal dynamics. Because you get that cool line towards the end where um, Murdoch says to one of the strangers where he's like, you know, you were looking,
Oh
for
yeah,
the
for like
secrets of human nature in the wrong
up here,
place,
not
and he
here.
and
Yeah,
he taps his heart, right? Taps his head. So, it's
yeah,
a head versus heart thing. But I wanted more of that heart, in the dialogue and in those character interactions.
yeah.
Also,
I think,
why are we just using knives? What is the deal with the knives? Like
yeah.
the insistence on that to me, I was just also distracted by.
Does
I was
anybody
like,
have a gun in this movie?
does
Are there
anyone or
guns in
like
this
I don't know?
movie?
What about a big old sword? Like, why is it tiny knives?
Yeah. I mean,
More
I
more
guess it makes sense.
menacing, easier
I
to
mean,
hide under your trench coat.
you can't use a gun in a spaceship because then you might decompress
Yeah.
decompress the whole thing or whatever. I did read in the like I trying not to just be like random trivia bomb, but this is relevant. In the IMDb trivia section, it talked about how the scene when William Hurt, Inspector Bumstead, and one of the others like fall out into space and they go through a force field and then they like die, like that was added. The force field effect wasn't originally going to be in there, but like test screening audiences were a little
Mm.
confused by the fact. So like that was a way of being like, oh, like in this force field we have air or whatever. I thought, I remember when I first saw this, like I did not know the twist of like them being like on this spaceship or whatever. And the whole like I love the whole idea of like, oh, I want to go to Shell Beach, this place I remember. And I love the like recurring thing of him asking people how to get there. And they're like, oh yeah, of course you just go. I, give me a second. And like nobody can
Hmm.
like I love that they all think they know how to get there and then when they're pressured to think about it they don't remember versus like, oh, I don't know, I've never heard of it kind of a thing. Like they've all heard of it but they've
Right.
never, like they can't verbalize how to get there or even like actually remember how to get there. And so I love like that kind of stuff. I love when Murdoch tells Bumstead, like when they're having like that kind of interrogation, and he was like, when was the last time you remember seeing the sun? Like, and you could see like the gears like going in William Hurt's head. And then when they go to find Shell Beach and they take the route that Dr. Schreiber, Kiefer Sutherland tells them to take, and they go up the stairwell and they open the door and you see what looks like the beach, and but from like the perspective of halfway down the stairwell, and Dr. Schreiber is at the base of the stairs and he knows the truth, but he even seems surprised at first when you see the beach through the doorway, and then they step through and it's just a poster for Shell Beach. And like I remember just as a kid being like blown away by that
Hmm.
idea of like them breaking down the brick wall. And I think in my head, like it was exploring the reality of like, oh, literally it's just like one layer of bricks and then you're out
Right.
in like space. Like that's kind of fucking terrifying. Like that whole like kind of reveal was super cool to me. I do like I can see the powder thing, uh, Kyle. Like I see that for sure. I think the others, like the main three, Mr. Hand, Mr. Book, Mr. Wall, and then like the kiddo, that like the main four that are following him around are much kind of creepier than like when you see the mass group of them and they're like just having weird like talking to their leader and stuff. I feel like a very big weak spot for me in this movie is like the final battle between Murdoch and
Yeah, the
the main
telekinetic,
guy.
like, mind battle is pretty goofy and
Yeah,
kind of
it's
weirdly executed.
yeah, and it just feels too. It's like somebody studio notes were like, you need a big action set piece, kind of a thing that just doesn't jive with like the rest of the movie. And I don't know. I don't have an idea for a better resolution of defeating them. Obviously, he needed to, but I'm sure there was one that was maybe more in fitting with the rest of the movie. The other piece that always bothered me about this, not enough to make me hate it, but that like always bothered me is like Kiefer Sutherland just like annoys the shit out of me in this. Like his
Oh yeah.
voice
Oh yeah.
affectation is so obnoxious with
Awful.
no
He was making
reason.
some acting choices when
Yes.
he was in this movie, and they did not pan out.
No. So like that I remember the first time I saw it, I was just like, what is why? Like and there's an opportunity in the narrative when they show the flashback of him removing his own memories, which I think is when his eye got jacked up. At least that's how I took it based on that scene. But like they could have done something to show like why his like voice got weird or something. But yeah,
I
that
mean, I
kind
liked
of
the broad outline of his character. I like the idea of, like, kind of a nebbish, psychologist who's been co-opted into carrying out the dirty work for these aliens and kind of hates himself for what he's doing. Like, there's a cool character there, but yeah,
yeah,
the performance and, like, the voice affectation,
just
totally
doesn't yeah.
bizarre.
And I think
Yeah,
it
and
maybe
having
part. Go ahead.
just having to like being able to see his character have to take his own memories as this like a sacrifice to this role. I thought it was also like an interesting moment. However, it all gets undercut for me because they're in this fake world,
Uh-huh.
or this world that, you know what I mean, like the betrayal of humanity has so much more weight when they're on Earth than when
Yeah.
they're in this place I don't understand, I guess
Well, and
is.
it
Yeah.
also begs a question to something that I don't feel like is ever resolved in the movie, and I feel like could be stronger for it, but maybe not. Is like when there is the reveal, either when they're showing them on the space station or earlier on. I think it's before that. Maybe it's after that. No, maybe it's before that. That like uh Schreiber explains, yeah, it's before find out they're on the space station that Schreiber talks about them trying to survive their race or whatever. If they could have done some sort of flashback showing them abducting humans or something, like, because like that
I
narrative
was
makes sense
craving
to
that
me.
too.
If they plucked humans off of Earth, and because they're a, you know, a fledgling, not fledgling, but like they're a dying species of extraterrestrials, like they don't have a homeworld anymore, so this is their hub floating through space. That would all, like, that's my head canon for it. To put that to screen, to do it in a way that does it justice, is more than like a two minute throwaway kind of thing. And so like, is that the best use of the movie's time to like show that background and showing people being abducted? But it begs the question, like, not having that background of like, were all these people, or many of these people inhabiting the world of Dark City, were they born there, like on the space station, or were they abducted from Earth? Because to your point, Kyle, like if they were just born there and this is the existence they've only ever had, not really that interesting compared to, or I guess it could be interesting if that was directly told, like, right, like these are like third
Yeah.
generation abducted humans that have been just bred into this space zoo kind of thing.
Right.
All of that, I think, is a missed opportunity to give you more of a foundation to care about these people. But to all of that point, if they were bred into this space zoo and they're like X generations removed from being abducted from Earth, they have no real memories
Yes.
to speak of.
Yeah.
Right.
Less compelling than you were abducted, you truly grew up on Shell Beach, your memory was completely wiped, but somehow this figment continued to like burst up to the top, sort of a thing.
Right. I mean, we're talking about stakes here. We're talking like what are the narrative and dramatic stakes, and without knowing what the confines of this experiment are we talking a couple thousand people that populate the city? Are we talking like a couple million? Like, it's not established enough, to your point, Kyle, like to care about kind of the plight of these humans. And I think for me, it was my curiosity was the main emotion
Mm-hmm.
that was carrying me along as a viewer, and that was enough to sustain me. And there were some cool thematic things going on, but I think you raised some really good points about kind of the lack of concrete drama and stakes to really get us invested in what's happening beyond kind of the murder mystery of, did Murdoch kill those women and what is happening with these weirdos in the trench coats? Yeah.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
guess.
I never even cared about that mystery.
Oh
Like,
yeah,
not for
that
a,
was so
not for
buried
a
in
second.
terms of like, I mean, that was one thing that 13th Floor had over this in terms of the murder, like the killings and stuff. Is like I actually bought for a little bit that Craig Bierko like thought he might have killed these people, kind of a thing. Whereas like the and visually they're doing some cool stuff with the killing, with the swirls and whatnot, but they never really come back to that too heavily, unless I missed it. Like there's just yeah, I did like the idea though, and this speaks to the idea that that subplot or whatever was kind of buried in it, when I think it was Mr. Hand that took John Murdoch's memories or whatever so he could try and find him better at the very, or I think when they kidnapped them at the poster for Shell Beach, Mr. Hand says, "Oh, I've become the man that you were supposed to be, Mr. Murdoch," and that him saying that I have like the mind of a serial killer now because we were supposed to imprint the serial killer mind on you, but you woke up halfway through it. That was what caused you to wake up with missing your memory. Is Dr. Schreiber didn't finish implanting this serial killer memory in you, but now it's in Mr. Hands, kind of a thing. I thought there was something cool there, not very well executed and didn't really pan out for any purpose, but maybe kind of explained why he, as an extraterrestrial, suddenly had a little more personality and maliciousness to him than he previously did throughout the movie. The last thing, unless you guys have anything else about this one, I really just want to call out briefly is how gross the water is in the tub when he wakes up in the beginning. Um,
Yeah.
it's
That
like
poor goldfish, man. He
it's
gives
like
that goldfish like a slow death by putting him back in that tub.
yeah, it's like purplish, reddish, or whatever. That you were talking about that scene, Alex, like the tile on the bathtubs and stuff. I have, or on the like in the bathroom. I have this on Blu-ray, and watching it for the podcast was the first time I watched the Blu-ray I have. It is one of the coolest Blu-ray menus I can think of, and I feel like more and more movies. I mean, I think it's probably from like 2013, 2014, but more and more like movie Blu-ray menus are like just generic and like boring. But this one has like the opening menu is like a special font for like play, scene select, and whatnot. But it's that's like overhead scene of him in the bathtub and the bathroom, and the light is just swinging back and forth in perpetuity on that menu. And then if you go into the options menu or the extras menu or whatever, it cuts to a billboard of Shell Beach with like the girl's like moving hand or whatever, and like it's I'm like, this is a cool Blu-ray. Like somebody put time and effort into designing this menu, which isn't a given these days with movie
It's a
releases.
lost art. It's a
Yes,
lost art.
absolutely.
I mean, in general, even before Blu-rays, like some DVD menus, they were awesome, and some were
Yeah.
the worst. And I always remember the ones that were for me were the worst. Where it's like, oh, it's 2, 3 in the morning, whenever they put on a movie, we'll fall asleep, and then you wake up at 6 a.m. and it's just on repeat, like
Oh yeah.
Blaring.
blasting you.
Yeah. There's a
Yeah.
there's a great TikTok I saw.
Shout out to Pirates of the Caribbean on that one.
There's a great TikTok I saw recently that was like, oh, like throwback to like you fall asleep at a friend's sleepover in like 1997, and then you wake up at 3 in the morning to like the Austin Powers menu being like groovy, baby, like, just over and over again, like at full volume.
Yeah.
Let's shift over to our highlight, to The Matrix. I will say one thing and then I'll kick it to you guys because so I had it's probably been a decade since I've watched The Matrix. It has been less than a decade since I've watched any of the sequels. I watched the most recent one within a year of it coming out. I've revisited Reloaded and Revolutions at least once or twice. This is not about the sequels, but I think there's a lot to hate about the sequels and some things to like about the sequels. And depending on which one at which point, like my opinion of them varies very wildly. And I think that clouded my memory for this movie because rewatching it, it is it is 25 years later. It has aged beautifully. It is as taut and intense and looks gorgeous, and the cast of characters is fun, and there's scenes that I kind of forgot happened and things like that. I just like I think it I in my head I was like, oh, this movie probably hasn't aged great. It'll probably feel very kind of like I think the greatest the the worst thing about the Matrix is the fact that the being red pilled idea has been co-opted by like the bro movement kind of a thing, which is really not an indictment on the movie at all or anything like that. But like that's just kind of a pity that concept has been hijacked by that movement. But yeah, I think it blew me away how well this movie aged and how it does not feel like out of in the way that 13th Floor feels 1999 up the wazoo. This feels like, yeah, obviously, like cell phones don't look like that anymore. That's really the only thing that feels of the time is the long, big cell phone kind of a thing. But the rest of it just is so fucking fun and so good, and the characters are so great, and Morpheus is still fucking awesome, and Keanu Reeves is great, and Hugo Weaving. Oh my god, dude! Like, I
One of the
think this.
best villains of all time.
Oh yeah, and I think this is the first movie that definitely for Hugo Weaving that I was ever like exposed to him. But even for Lawrence Fishburne, I think this is the first time I ever like paid attention to him in a movie, and like ever since, like fucking baddest ass guy on the planet as Morpheus, and like just you don't get any more iconic than that kind of a character. What do you guys have on this one?
Alex, go ahead, man. I want to hear what you have to say.
Yeah, I got thoughts. So the opening minute of this movie is something I appreciated more this rewatch because we were talking about like the love story elements, and I don't think any elements of this movie are weak, but I think for me in past viewings, one of the less robust elements was the Neo and Trinity romance and kind of that big climactic kiss moment that revives Neo. And they set that up in the first line of dialogue when you have Trinity and Cypher talking over the code of the Matrix, and they're talking about how Cypher is kind of poking fun at Trinity and being like, "Oh, like you're watching him, you like him, huh?" So like she is already, you know, falling in love with Neo as a character before they even meet in the Matrix, let alone in the real world. So I think that was like an elegant bit of character relationship building that I neglected to notice in previous viewings.
Why is she sitting in that room just randomly talking to Cypher though? That was my only I agree with you. Like I paid attention to that dialogue, I feel like, for the first time ever watching this movie, and was like, oh yeah, this like foreshadows a lot. Uh, but contextually, it makes no sense when you think about like the fact that I think she's using a hard line, but she's not unplugging from the matrix. So there's no reason to use a hard line to talk to him. And also just having like an idle chat with him like that versus, I mean, I guess it makes sense knowing his story, right? He's probably baiting her into that chat to try and get her caught.
And I get
Uh,
the impression that she was also doing like other hacker shit while she was talking to
Maybe,
Cypher.
yeah. I
Like,
guess that
Yeah,
would make
that
sense too.
for me also, I feel like there's a
Sorry, I didn't mean to just shit on the scene that you're talking
no,
about.
no, no,
totally, you're
no,
good.
no. It's an interesting point
It is.
that you can very easily take for granted. For me, there is once the way I always thought about it is that once you add the one into it, that the agents are so much care so much more, and there's a level of like Cold War to this world where my impression is that all these people are spending time going into the Matrix to learn and to be there without the, oh, they're chasing us because we have this person they think can take down the whole thing. So that's kind of why she's there, is because spending time in it is part of what they do as a matter of course, as a matter of like,
They're
this is
soldiers.
how
It's part
we
of their
there.
training,
Yeah,
right?
Yeah.
exactly. It's part of their training. It's part of just general reconnaissance. It's part of know, like, it's kind of like you know more about what the agents can do the more you spend time in there and all that stuff, and knowing how to evade them and this and that. Like, it definitely has there's danger to it, but I guess I always took that scene as, oh, they just have to spend some time in there to do this, to be a part of
Yeah.
this, to like, yeah.
No, and that makes sense. Like my question wasn't so much like why is she in the Matrix? It's why is she like using a hard line to talk to Cypher when she's could just be like in a internet cafe on a cell phone talking to him, because ostensibly the cell phone, no, I guess there is one point where
I, I think
Morpheus
I
says,
think it's I think it's Cypher talking to her because he is interested in her, right? Like that line in the end where
okay,
he's like, "Oh, I always thought I was in love with you." I think Cypher is bored. I think
yeah,
Cypher is like dissatisfied with the world, and
yeah,
so he's doing things that are inherently stupid, like just talking. And she's
Right,
the most interesting person to talk to because she
yeah,
is
that no,
the woman.
that makes a lot of sense. Yeah,
right. And she's doing the recon work.
yeah,
Yeah, Dustin, to your points about Lawrence Fishburne's badassery, one thing that always sticks out to me but really jumped out with this viewing is just he gives a master class in delivering expository dialogue.
oh yeah,
Like the way that he delivers every bit of information that you learn about the Matrix, it's become iconic and memeified for a reason. Like
oh yeah,
I can hear his voice in my head, like, thinking about just dozens of lines where he just, you know, drips with like pure just I don't even know
Yeah,
how to describe it, but it's just
yeah.
so captivating. And I think a good counterexample is the only bit of dialogue that came close to getting me to roll my eyes was another moment that's become iconic and memeified, and it's the little kid
With
at
the
the
spoon,
Oracle, yeah, who's like, "There is no spoon." And, like, to
yeah,
me, that was an example of, like, an actor, in this case, a child actor, like, no shade on them, they did a fine job, but they're delivering an inherently goofy line without the gravitas that someone like Lawrence Fishburne has, so it didn't take me out of the movie, but it was probably the closest line of dialogue in the whole 2 hours and 16 minutes that, made me go, "Huh, I could see how that could be." It was just on the border of, sincere and profound and goofy, and I think it was, like, the lack of that gravitas that you get from someone like Fishburne or, Carrie-Anne
yeah.
Moss,
Well,
delivering those kind of yeah, just
yeah.
out there ideas.
I think too what adds to that in that moment is the fact that that kid has a foreign accent, British. It sounded like to me, and
Mhm.
kind of. Yeah,
but he's also wearing like Asian, South Asian apparel, like, and I guess I always took that as to be like a representation of a child from somewhere else in the on the planet. It could be the one or something, but I think that just adds to the surreality and like taking you, I mean, which is ironic to say that like that felt surreal in this movie that's all about a fake reality, but like it was ext- extraneous to the rest of the world in a way that was a little bit jarring. And that, yeah,
Yeah,
I agree. Like that line is corny enough that without having someone like Fishburne deliver it in the quality that he can, it kind of loses some of its potential weight and punch, which speaks volumes to the fact that it still is one of the more iconic parts of the
Right,
movie.
that we all remember about this movie.
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, I always kind of was able to explain away the sort of weirdness of that character with just the idea that I don't know, what are you, some 7-year old, and you're told that you might be the one, you know what I mean?
Hmm.
And like
Hmm.
you're hanging out with all other people that might be the one. Like I don't know, I was always just like, yeah, these kids are gonna be fucked up, man. Like I don't know what is this weird daycare you're at with the Oracle, and
Yeah,
how long
right.
are you there? And all it's just so. But
Right,
I do agree. Yeah, the I don't want to. I don't. If you have more to say, Alex, I don't want to. I don't want to necessarily jump in. I feel like this is a tricky one because we all love this movie. We've all seen this movie. Like it's
right.
not. We're not. There's not. Here's what I this is the best goddamn movie that's ever been made. This is the. It is so good on so many levels. And I was watching it this time, having not seen it in a while, and I'm gonna share a couple of stories from outside the Matrix. But I just like I'm sitting there watching it to all your points, Dustin, about how it's aged, how it looks, not only visually but story, and like where we've gone from 1999 to now. It's just it's the greatest vintage wine that exists in movie making. I just like I cannot get enough of it. I'm lapping it up. And I do think that the sequels can kind of cloud it a little bit if you're not careful. But to
Hmm.
that point, so I am from there was I was friends with the local uh, critic in where I live, in the town I lived in New York, and something I will never forgive him for. Rest in peace. I'm happy to, we got to bring it up in the pod. Sorry, Jack, but Jack Garner for the Gannett News Service, he gave The Matrix a 5 out of 10 when it came out.
Ooh.
And that's 1 point. That's 1 point for every day I saw it in a row when I first saw this movie. And then Reloaded and Revolutions came out. He gave both of those movies 10s out of 10s. And there was a good period of my life
Those are
where
some
I was, I mean,
hot takes.
yes, so hot takes, and there was every. I mean, and I found myself at many dinner parties, many holiday parties with this man, and there was maybe a 5-year period where I just I would always go up to him and just be like, "You want to talk about that 5 on the Matrix? I think we need to talk about that 5 on the Matrix again." Like to the point where when I was old enough, he was like, "I don't want to do this anymore," and I was like, "Okay, that's fine. I won't bring it up anymore." But anyway, it's just like a very funny too. Like it's like to what you're saying about Dark City and Roger Ebert and all those things. Like it's how the public consumption of things and letting it age. I could see how maybe the Matrix would be like jarring to someone at first, and they wouldn't really have a good experience. And then by the time you're into the world, whatever Reloaded and Revolutions like dazzles you visually or whatever. But anyway, yeah, what I was able to kind of like enjoy the most about this viewing 982 or whatever it uh, is how every line of dialogue is dripping with foreshadowing in a way that is still not hokey and
Hmm.
like is so well, it's just deftly executed. The line that really got me this time, and I think it was because I was watching it with subtitles, which I wouldn't often do with this movie in particular because I know every line, I thought, is was when he's in his meeting with the Oracle, and she does the amazing thing where she just looks at his mouth and like holds his head and looks at his hands. And, I mean, the whole scene there is incredible. Yeah, I just love the like. What's really going to bake your noodle later is if you would have broken it. If I didn't tell you, but
Such a great
that's
line.
amazing. Such a great line. She is incredible. Like I could watch her read the phone book. I don't even care, and smoke cigarettes and eat cookies. But the line that killed me this time that I had never actually heard is when she takes his hands and walks away like, nope, sorry, kid, you're not the one. Looks like you're waiting for something. And he's like, waiting for what? And she goes, your next life, baby? I don't know. Which is exactly the end of the movie. Which is exactly the end of the movie. Like I like, hold on. I paused it. I rewound it. I watched it again. I was like, God damn it, man! Like that, and like every use of the word Jesus,
Mhm.
or you know, like when Cypher says you scared the bejesus out of me. Like every single moment of dialogue is so charged with this world and what's coming and what's going to happen, and like in a way that I just don't even know. I'm not surprised it was written by two people in conjunction because, like, how can you keep it all together and be able to, like, not let that run wild in a way that kind of falls apart or just seems, I don't know, like it just, man, every single line of dialogue just absolutely saturated with foreshadowing. It's incredible. And I think, kind of to your point as well, Alex, just going back to what you said initially when we started talking at the beginning of the pod, movies that are like things that are just burned into your brain as like this is part of my DNA. This movie and like how I then this movie asked all the questions that my high school education was not asking, and it got deep into all that stuff that my high school education was not asking, which is certainly what led me to like seek out philosophy and take my whole life on that pathway of essentially what this movie can be boiled down to, which is like a lot of Plato's Republic, like a lot of just we're seeing the shadows, we're not seeing the things in themselves, and then going out from there. But man, just God, all the fight scenes, all the dialogue. I thought the kind of the Neo and Carrie Ann Moss relationship was a little bit even better fleshed out this time. But
Hmm.
man, there is not a weak character in this thing. From like
It's got
Mouse,
like the
yeah,
all-time best turncoat character, like of as far as I'm concerned, like Cypher's like one of the best traders in ever put
yeah,
to celluloid. Like what
yeah,
a
Yeah,
fucking terrible thing to do, and like what a great role, just like lapping up like
Joe
that.
Pantoliano like just crushes that performance,
Yeah.
and I think what sells it is you can see the motivation that someone would want to go back to the way things
Yeah.
were. Like it's such a shitty, selfish thing to do, but it's human. There's like
Mhm.
something fundamentally human about wanting to pull the wool back over your eyes and be like, I don't like this new future. It is harder than my old life. I would like to go back, please. I don't care what I have to do to get there.
Yeah.
yeah. And I mean, I think to the point about Cypher being so goddamn good. No matter what he does, acting wise, before the Matrix or after, that's the only character I see.
Oh yeah.
And there's certain characters
Babies Day
that
Out, Cypher
yeah,
from Matrix.
it just yeah. I can only see that character, and there's some roles that are like that, but that's one of the most, I don't know, for me it just sticks. Like I can't think outside that box.
Yeah, I mean, as like a huge Tolkien nerd who adores Lord of the Rings trilogy and like talk about rewiring your brain and being a seminal, movie experience in your life, I still cannot see Hugo Weaving as Elrond takes me out of those scenes every fucking time because of how iconic he is as Agent Smith.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Like just wedded to that character forever. Yeah, I want
and
to go back to the Oracle scene real quick, Kyle, because there was
yeah.
a line there that jumped out at me this time, and it's the way that the Matrix undercuts Neo in a way that the sequels don't, and like they find the humor in whether it's Keanu's performance or the writing. Like there's the iconic moment where like he has the woe and he brings in like Ted Theodore Logan from Bill and Ted and is like, I can do that here, even in this, sci-fi masterpiece. But there's also a great line where he's talking to the Oracle and you know, she says something about like Trinity's love for him, and he says, "Oh, who would that be?" And she's like, not very bright, are you?" Or something
Not too
like
bright
that.
though. Not too bright
Yeah,
though.
not too bright though. And it's such
Yeah.
a great, like, funny moment and such a great undercutting of the character. And I don't want to get too into the sequels, but I think that's one of the ways that the sequels lose their way is they make Neo too much of a messiah figure without remembering that humanity, that humor. Like, I always love the moment where he flicks off Agent Smith is just so great.
I'll
Mhm.
give you the finger. It's just yeah, it's amazing.
Well, and
Oh man.
that scene in the beginning when he does that, and then Smith takes away his mouth, and then they put the bug in him, and then when he gets unplugged and he is in the pod, like I forgot like how much body horror there is in those two scenes. Like
Oh, it's horrifying. And it's
legit,
very HR Giger. Like I was thinking of Alien during that
yeah,
sequence, like the way the geometry is constructed of the pods and like yeah, it's such a great little like exactly like you said, Dustin, body horror moment in the middle of this.
And,
yeah,
and it's another that the scene in the car where they're trying to get the bug out of him. I mean,
yeah,
it's pretty heavy handed the more you watch it. But I can remember the second time that I saw that in the theater, and she's like, "Stop the car. We got to explain to you what's going on." And she calls him Copper Top, and that's another one of those moments where she just says, "Listen to me, Copper Top," and it's like on the first viewing, that just a line that just goes right over your head or whatever. You don't think about going back to, and you see it the second to the 900 millionth time I've seen it, and it's like just she's just calling him a battery, and
yeah.
like it was such an iconic ad during that time, the late 90s of the Duracells. Man,
Yeah.
it's
Oh,
Yeah,
so good.
it's almost a pity that like you know did either of you watch the with again without getting into it too much like the
I didn't even watch.
Animatrix?
No, no, I did not. I heard it was good.
There's some good stuff in there for sure, but like and a lot of it is like quote unquote flashback stories and stuff. Like characters you talked about like Mouse and like APOC and all those different characters in this movie that die in this movie. I would have loved to have seen, and maybe there's a comic out there that I'm not aware of, but like have learned more about those characters and like how they got unplugged from the Matrix and what their stories were, because like that's something I totally kind of forgot about this movie, being clouded by thinking of the sequels that I'm more familiar with recently, at least, is like, oh yeah, there are these like cool badass characters that we only meet for a few minutes in this movie and then ultimately end up dying, that I feel like have stories that are worth being told that haven't been told yet.
I freaking love Mouse, even though he only gets like 3 minutes of screen time, is such a great little character. And I love the little story he tells about it's
Tasty
not
wheat.
cream. Yeah, tasty wheat, thank you. And it adds to one of the tricks this movie plays, which is making you think that you, the viewer, could be living in the Matrix by tying it into our world and by referencing a product that we all know about. And it doesn't do this a lot. Like it doesn't, reference brands or companies or things that would, date it too much. But by referencing something that's a known quantity like tasty wheat, and then he talks about like chicken tasting like everything. And you're like, well, chicken does kind of taste like everything. And it makes you as a viewer be like, have that moment of like reflexive doubt to be like, shit, like, are we living in the Matrix? Which, is that stoner moment that everyone like has when they think about this movie. But I think it's like built into the DNA of the script. And I guess another thing that jumped out at me in comparison to our other two watches is how perfectly structured this movie is in terms of like three acts, and how the big reveal, the mystery of what is the Matrix, gets solved at the 30-minute mark, where Morpheus has that great expository scene in the red chair with the lightning flashing and the red pill, blue pill. And with those other movies that we saw, those reveals didn't happen until they were essentially over. And I think that's so key to this movie's permanence and to it like being this kind of archetype, you know, this like it's a modern myth that we now all have and can reference because like it uses the mystery as a framework for like what is ultimately a hero's journey story, where I think a lesser movie would have been all about the mystery and all about the world building, where here it's like we're gonna use that as scaffolding to tell this very like human story about redemption and faith. And it's kind of a fairy tale with that kiss at the end. Like it's got all of these elements that make it so again, it's like a monomyth that we all can relate to now, and I think the narrative structure is a big part of that.
Yeah, I mean, it is for a movie that's 2 hours and 16 minutes. I was like, again, and I've seen this so many times. I was still like shocked when I was like, oh yeah, this is about to end. There's like 10 more minutes to this movie because it just moves so beautifully. Here's a question I want to pose to you both because I think it is, as we've even just struggled in this one, it is difficult to remove ourselves from the whole world of the Matrix. If the sequels never get made, none of it. If all we ever got was the Matrix, my contention, and I want to know if you agree, this movie is universally regarded as like a top 5 movie of all time if we never get any of that corruption. Because even with where we went in the sequels and how big the world got, the ending to this being kind of like open ended and fun, and he flies, and like all those things have happened, and he's just done
Yeah.
this. It is very rarely do you get a movie where the ending is so satisfying, and yet you can also
There's
build
so much more
everything there's
potential.
so much more
Yeah.
potential. And it's such a hard moment, like it's such a hard space to live in. But just with, especially with how it has aged, if we never, because I'll be honest, like I love this movie in a core way. I have not even engaged with the most recent one that came out, like direct to streaming or whatever. I was like, I don't even care. Like I
Mhm.
just, it's so for I'm just kind of curious if you think if we never got the sequels, is this movie like, for lack of a better term, because I don't necessarily even agree with this, like Godfather status, right? Where
Yeah.
everyone is like,
Yeah,
oh,
or,
mhm,
like, even more better regarded than it currently is kind of a thing. Like,
right,
I definitely
yeah,
think that for sure. Like, I think that the sequels have pulled weight on not that people have, like, look at this movie worse because of the sequels, but I think that it is impossible to not judge this movie without at least being aware and cognizant of the sequels. And that I
hmm,
think kind of like it's you can't like say this, well, this was its own movie and the sequels are a part of a different thing. They're not. They're all like, it's continuing that story. And so that kind of like it definitely pulls like the weighted average down a little bit. But like, yeah, I mean, case in point, like that's my story with it, right? Like, it's been a long time since I rewatched this, and in my mind, not that I thought like, oh, this movie was dumb or bad, but I was like, oh, it probably didn't age that well in a different in a different way than I feel like I was thinking like, oh, the effects and the vibes of this movie didn't age well, and I think they aged great.
Hmm.
Whereas like the effects for Revolutions and Reloaded, minus like the Burly Brawl thing and Reloaded, like largely I think have aged well too, but like the story and whatnot is not as tight. It's too wide and too wide ranging. So yeah, I think that this movie would hold a different place in people's minds where the sequel's not a thing. It definitely would have been like on a list of like movies that deserve a sequel, or that we want to know the
oh yeah,
story more
Right. There
kind
would
of a
be its
thing.
own kind of discourse around it, but
Yeah, but like it definitely, and it's still, I mean, to that point again, it's like I said, I don't think people look at this poorly, but I think that it's easy to like forget how good this is when you look at the material that came after and how challenging some of that is and how vastly different. And I mean, there's probably a term for it where like the scope of the world that they set for themselves kind of was shooting themselves in the foot by it, right? Like, part of what makes this movie so great is that it is somewhat self-contained kind of a thing, in that like
right.
it's not it's not him taking on the entire world by the end of it, to your point, Kyle. Like,
Do yeah.
he,
It honestly reminds me of John Wick in that way as well. Another
yeah,
Keanu piece
yeah,
where
Sure.
the first one is so like it's relatively contained, but you have all these kind of chess
yeah.
pieces on the board, and then by the fourth one, it's like okay,
What the fuck? Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
No, I agree. I mean, that's how I feel about those movies. Like, I'm
Right.
interested, they're fun to watch, but like the story is becoming more and more convoluted to a detrimental effect, where like I'm not coming here for the story. I'm not coming to the Matrix first and foremost for the story. But once I'm here with this first one, the story is very tight. But what makes it tight is the fact that they talk about Zion, but they don't fucking spend half the movie in Zion. They
Right.
talk about the machines, but we don't spend most of the movie with the machines. We're spending it in the Matrix with Agent Smith. Like that's like our primary villain. And yeah, he exists in the sequels in various forms, but he gets washed out by the other machinations of the entire world going on around them.
Yeah. Okay. The question then for you, Alex: if there's no sequels, is this easily like in one of the top? Is this just be regarded as a top 5 movie of all time?
I I think it could be. I mean, it is hard to like remove that context and just knowing everything that came after it. But I do think it has that critical reception and did at the time. I think it has all the qualities that we attribute to other movies like A Godfather in terms of economy of storytelling and the perfectly calibrated nature of the script. The We haven't really talked about like the kind of the technical achievement that this movie is. I mean, we have with the visuals, but I was looking up what Oscars this movie won because on the Amazon screen it said, something about The Matrix winning, four-time Oscar winner, and I just had it, so I'm going to pull it up.
Yeah, and while you're pulling it up, I want to say, like, while we're talking about the juxtaposition of the sequels to this one and its place in history, I think what you said about the Neo character in the first one compared to the Neo character for the rest of the series is like extremely astute because it's, you have a little bit of that ignorance, frankly, to go on with Keanu, which he plays into well, and the character plays into well, and the whole world interacts with him well. And then, yeah, in 2 and 3, he's the all-knowing in a lot of ways, right? Like he's awoken. He is the Dalai Lama of this world. He has, and so there is the conversation that the architect and Neo have in the second one is not even remotely possible in the first one, nor would it even
Yeah,
be attempted, right? But like
Right.
the fact that that kind of conversation can happen then does speak to the movements that that character makes, and something, and is an essential difference. Yeah, I don't know how to get around it, with him being the one and him becoming,
yeah.
that all
Well,
being a
I
part of
mean,
it. But
part
like,
of
yeah,
part of what makes this movie so compelling, right, is like as an audience member, you're on that journey with him to like from start to finish, like to his real like self realization as the one. Like you're doing that with him, and then I feel like, and it not to say that this can't work in a movie, but I don't think it works as well as it could in the sequels, at least Reloaded and Revolutions. You go into this journey as a total outsider, and it's very clear that all the characters know more than you know, and there's some things that they're learning, but then the shit that they're learning, like that scene with him talking to the fucking architect, doesn't make any fucking sense whatsoever. So it becomes so goddamn convoluted that like you don't have an entry point to following that story and being like on that journey with the character, right? The moment they give you that opportunity to be on the journey with that character, you're like, I don't fucking understand what's going on here. Like, what is this guy
Right.
with white hair talking about? Like, this doesn't make any sense. And so it
Right.
completely takes you out of it. Whereas here, like in the first one, I don't feel like there's any beat of the story that like doesn't make sense, which is maybe it's a pretty low bar to come over, and I feel like that's something that the sequels struggle with.
Sure, because I think the sequels, like you were saying about the John Wick movies, Kyle, the sequels become about expanding the world and the mythology of the Matrix universe and resolving that kind of meta conflict between the humans and the machines, that it loses its potency as a story about all these other things where you're not getting the hero's journey, you're not getting the sci-fi take on Plato's Republic. You're not getting these really interesting readings of Zen Buddhism and Judeo-Christian mythology with the one. It becomes about the Matrix like franchise and less about the story that they told in this first movie. same thing with John Wick. It became about the John Wick franchise rather than this one really powerful narrative about a guy seeking vengeance. And yeah, to just go back to the technical achievements that The Matrix racked up, best visual effects, best film editing, best sound mixing, best sound editing. And I think, those kind of would help cement it as more of like a film canon classic to your question,
Mhm.
Kyle. That combination of technical artistry, narrative mastery, and in comparison to the other two movies that we talked about this week, where the elements didn't gel, where you had cool world building, but like bad characterization, or underdeveloped, scripting and storytelling. Here, all of the elements are just perfectly complementary, where the action scenes exist to further character, further themes. They're all working in concert with each other, which to me is a big hallmark of movies that we do kind of revere as those films that stand the test of time. And yeah, it's been 25 years. It's been a quarter of a century since this movie came out, and you know, I feel like we are still going to be talking about it 25 years from now, even with the kind of more complicated legacy that it has with those three sequels.
Yeah. Well, on that note, I think we've progressively spent 5 minutes more on each movie as we've moved through them, which I feel like makes sense. That does it for episode 8. Hopefully, I didn't shoot myself in the foot in the order these come out. This should be episode 8 of Triple Take Cinema. As always, you've got Dustin, Kyle, and Alex here, and we'll catch you guys next time. Have a great day, evening, morning, afternoon, whenever you're listening.